This is going to be my own personal audit. It helps to show the pattern of auditing. It's going to sound like some kind of testimony or defense, but the real purpose is to show how auditing works. I've written out this audit in my web pages, and you'll see on the screen what that address is so that you can look at it yourself and decide whether or not you want to examine any of the issues I'm going to bring up in more detail. I did spend the better part of, 60-hour weeks for about 8 years since 1999 auditing this. So obviously in a 10-minute YouTube upload, I'm not going to be able to explain to your satisfaction all the things that I came up with. So I beg your indulgence there. I started out, as far as I know, in Christianity, but my family went all around the ballpark as far as the number of religions that they examined and then discarded and then examined another one. So I kind of grew up in an environment where it didn't matter what you believed, it did matter that you understood what you believed and it was your own personal conviction. So that was the milieu in which I grew up. Now, in doing that, just the same, I, very early on, God existed to me. It's just flat common sense. You look up at the sky and say, you know what, it didn't get here on its own. And for those of you who are atheists, I don't understand that at all. Because infinity means that there has to be a person. It's not infinity without a person. I can't be a person, a relative person, a limited, finite person, if there isn't an infinite person, because if you have relatives, you must have absolutes. It's true in math. It has to be true in everything else. So that's all I can say as far as God, not God debate. And I'm not even going to get started on evolution. I did not come from a monkey. Thank you. And I'm sorry that I have such an adamant view on it. I've looked at the question and I'm really kind of tired of it. So now let's get back to the God thing. Most people who have ever lived believe in some version of God. There's a question of whether there are multiple polytheistic gods, which has been pretty much the history of the world. And polytheism is a system of godnesses which are unequal. That's very, very different from Trinity. I don't understand why people don't grasp that, but I'll try to explain it. If you look back on any kind of culture and its gods, there were limited gods that had limited powers, and the two, no two gods were exactly alike. It was like people. They were really like super people. So one god was particularly talented with the underworld. Another one, and he didn't have any power over the seasons. Okay, so each god had his own little turf and his own powers related to that turf, and they were all unequal. That's polytheism. What's called monotheism in Christianity really is not, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. But it's really essential I start with that first to explain my own auditing, because it's key to the Bible. There is no such thing as salvation if you don't have three gods. It doesn't work. But getting back to the monotheistic concept, what we call monotheism, is infinite God, a God that has no limitations. And so you have Zoroastrianism, you have Judaism, you have what's commonly called Christian monotheism, the idea that there's this infinite God with no limits, and therefore in the mind of us humans, it doesn't brook any kind of allowance for multiple persons, because we're thinking spatially. We're not regarding that infinity is qualitative. Math teaches you that infinity is qualitative. Math is unseen. Math has no mass. Math has no energy, yet it acts on everything. I mean, math is really behind all the science in the universe. It's the unseen principles of acting on the universe. In the same manner, there's this unseen person or persons without limits. And it's qualitative, not quantitative. Consequently, infinity is qualitative. Infinite God is qualitative. But in our minds, we're thinking monotheism because we can't get our heads around the idea that infinity is a qualitative thing. And so we have to say, well, there's just one God. Actually, the way that whole thing came about is that there's one nature. The Greek word is ousia. There's one nature of Godness that's infinite. But the number of persons, which is a spatial concept, there's no limit on that. I mean, there's revelation, as you might want to call it, from various religions about how many gods there are that are allegedly infinite. But mathematically and conceptually, if infinity is qualitative, the number is a quantitative concept, so there isn't any such limitation. There either is a certain number or not, but there's no inherent limitation in infinity. Now let's go back to the qualitative aspect of infinity. You have a soul. I have a soul. Your soul has certain immaterial, it's immaterial, you can't ever see it. You can cut open the brain, you can't find the soul. You can measure the synapses, you can see that there's electronic movement going along the brain, but you can't actually see the thought itself. You can only tell that thought is occurring. You can also tell that emotion is affected by thought, by whether or not, which brain it is and all those experiments that they've done. But you cannot read the thought because the thought is immaterial. Now, being a finite person means you have a finite number of thoughts. They are all immaterial, but they are also finite. Consequently, there is a finite quality to your soul. It has a beginning, it has no end, but it has, as it were, boundaries, and those boundaries are the number of thoughts you have, the kinds of thoughts you have, the character of the thoughts you have. So you are finitely, qualitatively finite. So am I. So is every other human being. So humanness is qualitatively finite. First, because we have a beginning. Second, because there are boundaries to our own thinking. We don't all think the same number of thoughts. We don't all think the same character of thoughts. We learn, so the number and the character of our thoughts is constantly changing. That's the difference between finite and infinite. In God, everything is all at once. And that would be true whether you said a monotheistic version of God or the Trinity, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So that the character of an infinite person is that all the thoughts, all the character, all everything that could ever be, was, past, present, future, is one huge now. The Greek has a really great way of putting it. It's a static present tense, one big now. So what we consider to be past, present, and future is really all one big now to an infinite person. To us, it's progressing. To an infinite person, it's not progressing. It's like a Georges Seurat painting. Georges Seurat was a painter, I think it was in the 19th century. He did all these little dots. And when you saw the dots at a distance, they actually formed a painting, like Sunday Afternoon in the Park is one of his famous paintings. So all those dots, think of infinity like a whole, all the dots that ever could be or would be, and actually they're constantly increasing, all on one canvas. That's